All right, good morning, everyone. Go ahead and have a seat. All right, we are back on the record. We have council parties and our jurors present. I hope everybody had a good night. And I think yesterday we had finished last with the testimony of, let's see, Ms. Michelle Wilson. And does the state at this point have another witness they wish to call?
Yes, we do, Your Honor. At this time, the state would call Bradley Sieck.
Okay. Yeah. Good morning, sir. Just come on all the way up here if you would. Just grab a seat to my far left if you would. So you're going to need to turn on that microphone. There's a little button on the base of it there. Yep, you can move that microphone however you want. All right, sir, first thing I'm going to do is swear you in. If you please raise your right hand. Sir, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you'll be giving in these proceedings will be the truth?
Yes.
Okay. And then for the record, can you please give us your first name and your last name and spell them both for us?
Bradley Sieck, B-R-A-D-L-E-Y-S-I-E-C-K.
All right, thank you, Mr. Sieck. Ms. Williams.
Thank you. Mr. Sieck, where do you currently live?
Toledo, Iowa.
And are you currently employed?
Yeah, self-employed.
Okay. And prior to being self-employed, around September of 2022, where were you employed?
Nolan Farms.
How long did you work for Nolan Farms?
About a year and 4 months or 5 months, something like that.
Okay. So when did you end your employment with Nolan Farms?
January of 24.
Okay. So beginning, end of January?
Yeah, end of it, January.
While you were employed with Nolan Farms, did you know someone by the name of Houston Danker?
Yes.
And besides working with him, how did you know Houston?
I met him a few times prior, but just short, 5 minutes here or there. That was about it.
So mostly just co-workers?
Yeah.
At some point, while you were working with Mr. Danker, did he ask you to do something for him?
Yes.
What did he ask you to do?
Hold his guns.
Okay. Did you agree to hold the guns
Yes.
for him?
Yes.
Can you describe the circumstances that led to that arrangement?
He was moving, and his girlfriend, whatever he was moving in with, had a daycare in her house, so I'm assuming he didn't want him there.
And is that what he told you?
No, he never said that. He just said, "Can you hold these for me?" And that was it.
Okay, gotcha. Did you agree to hold the weapons
Yes.
for him? After that conversation with Mr. Danker, did he give you any guns?
Yes.
And where did he bring those to?
To work.
Okay. How many guns did he bring you?
3.
Can you describe those firearms?
Yes.
What firearms did he bring to you?
One was an AR-15, one was a double barrel shotgun, and one was a .22 rifle.
Okay. Was it a Ruger 1022?
Yes.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
You may.
Your Honor, I'm going to approach the witness with one of the firearms in question. I just want to let the court know that it has been inspected by law enforcement and is safe at this point.
All right, thank you.
May I approach?
You may. And you don't need to ask again with this witness.
Mr. Sieck, I am holding what has been marked as State's Exhibit 298. Do you recognize this
Yes.
firearm?
Yes.
Can you describe it for me?
It's a
What
Ruger,
firearm is it?
Ruger 1022.
Okay. And how do you recognize it?
Yeah, that's one Houston give me, one of them.
Okay. And did you have this weapon stored at your home?
Yes.
At this time, Your Honor, by agreement of the parties, we would offer State's Exhibit 298.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
All right, 298 is admitted.
Mr. Sieck, after Mr. Danker gave you the guns, where did you keep them?
In the closet, in my bedroom.
Of your home?
Yes.
And did you ever give those guns to anyone else or remove them from your possession during the time that you had them?
No.
Were there any accessories to these guns, like clips or ammunition, that
No.
were provided to you with those guns?
No.
At some point after you strike that, how long did you have these guns?
6, 8 months maybe.
Okay. At some point during the time that you had possession of the 3 guns Houston Danker gave you, did you bring that fact up with Mr. Danker?
Yes.
And when you mentioned it, what was his response?
Don't worry about it. Just keep holding on to them.
That's a good reminder to everybody to make sure your phones are off, please.
After that conversation with Mr. Danker, did anything change with regard to the custody of those weapons?
No.
And were those firearms, including the Ruger 1022 rifle, accessed by anyone else while they were in your possession?
No.
Did you eventually turn those firearms over to law enforcement?
Yes.
Was that because Mr. Danker was not going to pick them up?
Yeah.
Do you recall when you turned those firearms over to law enforcement?
April or May, late April. I don't know. I don't remember. It was a Thursday. That's all I know.
Would that have been of 2024 that you turned them over?
Yes.
Who did you turn those firearms over to?
Brian Randall's the one that picked him up.
Is that the last involvement you had with those firearms?
Yes.
I don't have any further questions. Thank you.
Mr. Hawbaker, any cross-examination?
Thank you, Your Honor. Morning, sir.
Morning.
Just so I'm clear, the conversation, well, limited conversation that Mr. Danker had with you, which was basically, here, will you hold my guns? When did that happen?
Late summer, early fall of
What year?
23.
So late summer, early fall 2023.
Yep.
So the 6 to 8 months is what kind of gets you to the wraparound
Yep.
year of 2024 in April.
Yep.
Nothing further. Thank you.
Anything further, Ms. Williams? No, Your Honor. Right. Thank you, sir. You may step down. You're excused.
You want me to shut this on?
No, you can leave it on. Thank you. Mr. Kodiaga, is the state prepared to call its next witness?
Yes, Your Honor. The state calls Brian Randall.
Good morning, sir. You come on up here to my far left, if you would. And you can go ahead and have a seat when you get there. You can adjust that microphone however you'd like. It's on. First thing I'm going to do, sir, is swear you in. If you'd please raise your right hand. Sir, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you'll be giving in these proceedings will be the truth?
I do.
All right, and then for the record, can you please provide us with your first name and your last name and spell them for us?
Brian Randall, B-R-I-A-N-R-A-N-D-A-L-L.
All right, thank you, Mr. Randall. Mr. Kodiaga.
Thank you, Judge. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
You've stated your name. How are you currently employed?
I'm a deputy for Tama County Sheriff's Office
And how long have you been with the Tama County Sheriff's Office?
since 2011.
You say you're a deputy sheriff at the county attorney's office, at the sheriff's office?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, deputy sheriff, fair to state that you're a licensed peace officer in the state of Iowa?
Yes, sir. I graduated from the Iowa Law Enforcement Academy in 2003.
In the course of your duties, were you part of the investigation of the case that brings us to this courtroom today?
I was.
As part of your investigations in this case, did you at some point go to the residence of someone called Bradley Sieck or get in touch with him to pick some firearms?
I did.
Do you remember when that was?
There was 3 in total that I received from Brad. One was a .22 rifle, one was a double-barrel shotgun, and one was an AR-style rifle.
So there were 3 firearms that you received from Bradley Sieck.
Yes.
And you've described them. Can you describe, you've stated what those items are. Can you briefly describe what they look like or what type of firearms they are?
So the AR-style rifle is a semi-automatic style rifle, large caliber, generally with a short barrel. Double-barrel shotgun, it's just two barrels, one side by side, and then a .22 rifle, which is also a semi-automatic, small caliber rifle.
From your understanding, these guns belong to Houston Danker.
Correct.
Permission to approach the witness?
You may, and you don't need to ask again with this witness.
I'm going to show you what's been admitted into evidence as 298. Do you recognize what that is?
I do.
Okay. Can you tell the jury what 298 will be?
That is the .22 rifle that I received from Brad Sieck belonging to Houston Danker.
As part of the investigation in this case, was that type of firearm of interest that you and your other officers were looking for?
It was.
When you received this firearm, what did you do with it?
It was initially checked into evidence at the Tama County Sheriff's Office, and then it was delivered to the Iowa DCI lab in Ankeny, I believe by Detective Killian.
Why was it delivered to the lab?
To be tested against the casing that we found at the scene of the homicide.
So, as part of the investigation, you were aware that there was a casing of a .22 that had been found at the scene, and Therefore, you needed to confirm if it's the same firearm that had been used, correct?
That is correct.
As part of your investigation, did you check to see if the defendant, Karina Cooper, had a permit to use a firearm and was someone who was either authorized to use firearms or have a firearm with her?
I did.
Can you tell me what you did to find that out?
So I checked the records at the Tama County Sheriff's Office. We keep a computerized record of anybody who obtains a permit to purchase or a permit to carry firearms in our database at the Sheriff's Office.
I'm going to show you what has been marked as stated in 2 or 3 for the purposes of identification. Do you recognize what 2 or 3 will be?
I do.
What is 2 or 3?
That would be a printout of the electronic record that we maintain at the Sheriff's Office showing that Karina has or had a permit to carry weapons.
Fair and accurate of what you have as a printout from your office?
Yes.
We move to agree 2 or 3.
Any objection?
Need to see it first, Judge.
All right.
No objection, Your Honor.
Then Exhibit 203 is admitted.
So to get a permit to have a firearm, what does a person need to do?
So the initial permit at that time would require you to provide proof of satisfactory training, and that the satisfactory part is determined by the state of Iowa, not determined by the Tama County Sheriff's Office. But you would have to provide proof of training for the initial permit. A renewal permit does not require, we just use the initial training.
And the initial training, does that consist of firing a firearm, using a firearm, being able to handle a firearm?
It does.
And as you testified, what we have that's been admitted as 2 or 3 is a renewal permit, and for that you don't have to do anything for renewal anymore, correct?
Correct.
So once you get the initial permit where you have to show your capability of using the firearm, after that you just yearly renew it without having to do any further training with the firearm, correct?
Correct.
I have no further questions. Thank you.
Cross-examination by, I'm not sure, Mr. Hawbaker?
It's me. I should have lit up my light. Thanks,
Oh, that's
Judge.
all right.
It's okay. Did you ever go to the scene at the Cooper's house? Did you ever go there?
I did.
Okay. And were you aware that part of the initial investigation, there were several firearms disclosed and turned over from the Cooper house?
I was.
Okay. Did Houston Danker, up until obviously the time that you retrieved these weapons, ever turn over weapons to the Tama County Sheriff's Department?
There was one other weapon that he turned over.
Okay. And was that the Ruger long rifle?
Potentially, I guess I'm not sure about the Ruger. I personally accepted that from him in November of 2023 and delivered it to the lab. I don't recall the brand.
It's from who?
Houston Danker.
What was that gun?
It was a 22.
Okay. Was it exhibit, what is it? 298? 298. Was it exhibit 298?
It was not.
Okay. So those guns, the only way that you retrieve those is from Mr. Sieck. Exhibit 203, which was the Tama County Sheriff's Department's information on Ms. Cooper's permit to carry. That permit to carry was issued in 2016, correct?
Yes, I believe so.
And as part of obtaining a permit to carry, while I could understand why some trading might have you fire the firearm, it's not actually required for the permit, is it?
Not for Iowa.
So it is possible for somebody to obtain the permit and never having fired whatever firearm they may have.
It is possible.
Nothing further. Thank you.
Anything further?
No, Your Honor.
All right, thank you, sir. You may step down. You're free to go. All right, is the state prepared to call its next witness?
Yes, if we may have a minute, Your Honor.
You may.
The state calls Janna Berry.
Good morning. Ms. Berry, if you want to have a seat to my far left when you get up here, that'd be great. And that microphone's on. You can move it around however you'd like. I'm going to go ahead and swear you in first, so please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony that you'll be giving in these proceedings will be the truth?
I do.
All right, and then can you please give us your first name and your last name and spell them for us for the record?
It's Janna Berry, Jonna Berry.
All right, thank you, Ms. Berry. Mr. Kodiaga.
Thank you, Judge. Good morning.
Good morning.
Can you tell the jury what you do for a living?
Yes, I work at the DCI, which is the Division of Criminal Investigations Crime Laboratory. So I work in the toxicology section as well as on the crime scene team.
Can you just briefly tell us what the toxicology section is?
So the toxicology section tests blood and urine for drugs.
Okay. And the crime scene team, can you tell us about that?
Yes, so as a member of the crime scene team, we're on call a few times a year, and we will go out to assist cities or towns with homicides or crime scenes that they aren't able to handle themselves.
What is your training and experience?
So in the crime scene team, I have a year-long or a week-long course at the Iowa Association of Identification. It was put on in 2016. It was a week-long course on basic crime scene school. And then in 2017, I attended the Advanced Crime Scene School put on by the same association.
As part of your experience, you visited various crime scenes over the years?
I have.
Were you part of the investigation that brings us to this courtroom today?
I was.
Okay. Can you tell us what your involvement was in this investigation?
So my partner, Madison Martin, and I went to a residence at 2798 Iowa Highway 8 in Traer, Iowa. And we were asked to process that residence for trace amounts of blood and any other items that may have evidential value to the death investigation that occurred in 2021. And this was in 2024.
Do you know what month in 2024?
In May.
Okay. So will around May 8th or on or about May 6th, I believe, would have been the date?
Yes, May 8th.
Did you have some instructions or some knowledge of some of the things that you would be looking for at this residence?
Yes, we did.
Did you know the owner of this residence?
We were informed that Mr. Houston Danker was the residence of that address.
So you're going to this residence in Traer, believing that the owner would be Mr. Houston Danker?
Yes.
Can you tell us what are some of the things that you were tasked with doing at this residence?
Yes, so like I said, we were screening for trace amounts of blood. So we used some of our reagents called Blue Star to search for blood. And we also were informed that Mr. Danker may have been wearing a red or maroon sweatshirt and blue jeans at the time. So we searched the residence for that type of clothing as well.
So you're looking for items of clothing.
Correct.
And you're also looking for presence of blood at the residence.
That's correct.
Can you describe the residence for the jury briefly?
Yes, so the residence was located out kind of in the country. It was a 2-story house with a basement. There was a machine shed as well as kind of a detached garage, additional shed around the building with some grain bins or silos as well on the property.
What do you do when you go to a crime scene like this? What are some of the things that you do?
Well, the first thing we do is we kind of take what's called like an outside-in approach. So we'll photograph the exterior of the residence and then photograph the interior as we walk through for the first time. One person will do the photos and the other person begins sketching the scene and taking notes. And we do this sort of initial documentation in order to document the scene as it was when we arrived before we end up searching or processing anything.
You talked about there being one of the things you're tasked to was to look for the presence of blood. How do you do that from your analysis standpoint?
So one of the screening reagents we use is called Blue Star. And so Blue Star is really helpful to better visualize blood stains when you can't see them with your naked eye. So when you spray it on, it will do a chemiluminescence reaction where basically it glows blue if it comes in contact with small amounts of blood.
So it's a chemical reagent that will be able to tell the presence or absence of blood?
Yes.
Could you explain the process of applying that Blue Star?
So in this process, since the reaction glows blue, the first thing we have to do is make the room as dark as possible in order to better visualize that. Once we can make the room as dark as possible, we'll spray the Blue Star over an area and then document where we see any sort of what we call positive reactions or that glowing blue reaction, yeah.
Was there a way that you handled the scene in terms of either cutting it into quadrants or separating it into certain sections?
Yes. So the areas we sprayed, we kind of separated out as far as where the most foot traffic would be, because we were told there might be potential blood on a person's shoe in the area. So we sprayed the entryway at the beginning of the residence first, and then proceeded in to spray the kitchen area as well.
Can you describe what you found in the various areas that you sprayed for this Blue Star?
So in the entryway, we saw some positive reactions on the carpet and kind of a more larger area towards the center. So we ended up collecting that entire carpet to bring back for our DNA section. And we also collected a white rug that was in that area as well.
When you say a positive reaction, what do you mean by that?
I'm sorry. Can
When you say a positive reaction, what does that mean?
So that means that that blue star may have come in contact with trace amounts of blood in the carpet.
So it's just an indication that maybe someone tracked some blood, or there's some blood that it's saying there could be some positive for blood on that carpet.
Yes, there's potential for that.
There's some evidence that you found suggesting someone attempted to clean up the carpet or the blood?
It's difficult to say if there was any, I can't tell.
Moving to the kitchen, what did you find?
When we sprayed the kitchen floor, we had a couple small positive reactions on just various areas on the kitchen floor. We just swabbed those areas with cotton swabs to take back to our DNA section.
And as part of what you're testifying to, you stated you take pictures of what you see?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Well, did that happen in this, when you did this?
Yes, we did.
Permission to approach?
You may.
Remind you what's been marked as State Exhibit 261 through 266. Do you recognize what 261 through 266 will be?
I do.
What are they?
They are photos that we took at the crime scene.
Okay. Now, do they fairly and accurately depict what you took at that time?
They do.
Okay. We move to admit 261 through 266.
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. No objection, then exhibits 261 through 266 are admitted.
We'll move to publish.
You may, do you have them ready to go? All right. Hold on.
Are you able to see what has been admitted as 261?
I can.
Okay. You talked about some footwear that you are looking for with a specific pattern. What footwear and what pattern were you looking for?
So there was a footwear impression that was found by the initial crime scene team with a diamond-shaped sort of pattern. So that was the type of pattern that we were looking for on the bottom of these shoes.
Did you, as part of your being in this residence, locate footwear that had what you were looking for in terms of a diamond-shaped pattern?
We believe this pattern was fairly consistent with the footwear impression that was found at the scene.
262, would that be where you found the shoe in this house that belonged to Houston Danker?
Yes, this is in the entryway with the carpet and the black vans. That's where they were located.
And you described those shoes as a type of shoes called Vans?
Yes, correct.
Fair enough to say 263 is a close-up of that same Vans
Yes.
shoes? What do we see on 264?
So this is a photo of the entryway after we removed the carpet, and we applied Blue Star to the underside of the carpet as well, or that surface.
So, in other words, is that how it appears with the Blue Star?
No, that's actually a flashlight shining onto the floor because the whole room was dark, so we were trying to get a photo of the floor with the flashlight on it.
How would you describe the flow that you took this picture of?
Well, this is after the carpet was removed, so there's kind of like an adhesive, sticky tack on the floor at that point in time.
Okay, and this is when you'd remove the carpet to that floor.
Yes, this is after the carpet was removed.
What do we see on 265?
This is the same area with just the flashlight moved off to the side. I believe this was before we applied Blue Star to it.
What about 266?
This is another, the same area with the flashlight in a different space.
You described the shoes that you took photos of. Did you collect those shoes for evidence purposes?
We did.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as State Exhibit 300 for the purposes of identification. Do you recognize what 300 is?
I do.
Are those the same van shoes that you testified to photographing and taking from these residents?
They are.
And there are paired, there's another pair of these. Do they accurately depict what you took on that day?
Yes.
We'll move to admit State Exhibit 300.
Any objections, Mr. Baker?
None, Your Honor.
State's Exhibit 300 is admitted.
I will publish here to the jury. Were there electronic devices that you also secured from these residents?
Yes, we collected 3 cell phones.
Do you remember can you describe what cell phones you collected?
There were 2 white iPhones in the kitchen. One had a green case on it, as well as 1 black iPhone in the sort of dining room area on the piano.
And fair enough to say these were taken to the lab for further testing too?
I believe we transferred the custody to Special Agent Villata at the scene, so he took those.
Was there presence of firearms or ammunition or any ballistic evidence that you recovered from Houston Danker's residence?
Yes, we recovered 14 22 caliber fired shell casings from the outdoor, kind of around the porch area of the residence.
We just have a minute, Judge.
You may.
I have no further questions. Thank you.
Cross-examination, Mr. Hawbaker.
Thank you, Your Honor. Morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
So your investigation was limited to the visit to Houston Danker's property, is that right?
That's correct.
The footwear that was collected, the vans that have been described, we've heard testimony previously from somebody that does impressions. Okay. Was there an analysis of those of impressions found at the Cooper residence of those shoes, with those shoes?
Not at the residence, no.
That wasn't a very good. Are you aware that there was a footwear impression found at the Cooper residence?
I am.
Do you know, and I'm asking this again because I asked it poorly, do you know if the shoes that you found at Houston Danker's residence were compared to those footwear impressions?
I don't know if they were compared.
The evidence of blood that you found at Houston Danker's house, was that ever analyzed, swabs taken?
We collected like the carpet and some swabs, and they were sent to DNA for analysis.
Okay, did you do that analysis?
I did not.
Did you collect the shell casings that you found outside?
We did.
Okay. Did you participate in any matching of those shell casings with firearms found in this case?
I did not.
Every photo that we saw, every shoe that was collected that you participated in were all found at Houston Danker's residence, correct?
That's correct.
And is it understood that at the time of the killing of Brian Cooper, this was the residence that Houston Danker resided in?
Yes.
Nothing further, thank you.
Any redirect?
You were tasked to look for a certain type of footwear, correct? Like what you testified to, you're looking for a shoe that can make diamond patterns or will leave such an impression, correct?
Yes, we were looking for that type of pattern.
That's what you found that has been now admitted, correct?
Those were the shoes we thought were best consistent with the pattern.
Okay. And fair enough to say there were other people in the lab who were in charge of either doing firearms testing, ballistic testing, and also doing the DNA testing. Your job for this was only to go in and collect some evidence at this residence.
That's correct.
I have no further questions. Thank you.
Anything further?
And the significance of those shoes is quite clear. The shoes that you collected from Houston Danker's place, the Vans, had the similar print characteristics as the markings that were found at the Cooper residence, right?
That's why we collected them. We believe they were a consistent pattern.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
All right, thank you, ma'am. You may step
Thank
down. You're excused. All right, is the state prepared to call its next witness?
Yeah, the state calls Sabrina Sea.
Good morning, ma'am. Just have you come on up to the seat to my far left, if you would. All right, I'm going to go ahead and swear you in. If you please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you'll be giving in these proceedings will be the truth?
I do.
All right, and then for the record, can you please give us your first name and your last name and spell them both?
My name is Sabrina, Sabrina, Seehofer, Seehafer.
Right, thank you. Mr. Kodiaga.
Thank you. What do you do for a living?
I'm employed by the State of Iowa Department of Public Safety, Division of Criminal Investigations, Criminalistics Laboratory, better known as the DCI Crime Lab.
So we've heard a lot from other DCI crime lab people you work with, like the lady who just left over here, you work with her, correct?
Yes, I do.
What do you do at the crime lab?
My primary assignment is to the DNA section of the laboratory.
Can you briefly tell the jury your qualifications in terms of education and professional experience to be in your position?
Yes, I have a bachelor's degree in biology from Westminster College in Fulton, Missouri, a master's and a PhD in biochemistry from University of Rochester in Rochester, New York. Once I completed my graduate work, I was employed by the Iowa DCI Crime Lab. I started my training there, and that meets all the guidelines as set forth by the FBI Quality Assurance Standards. Since I've been employed at the DCI, I've also had over 500 continuing education hours, specifically in forensic DNA analysis. In addition, I'm also certified by the American Board of Criminalistics in molecular biology.
We hired an expert on DNA yesterday, so I'm not going to ask you much more on what DNA is. I believe it's still consistent to that. So we'll move on. Did you do DNA analysis in this particular case?
Yes.
What items, can you describe to the jury the items you received and what you did with them?
Specifically, I was submitted various items of clothing and shoes and some pieces of carpet, also some swabs and a known reference sample. A subset of those samples I did not analyze. The other ones, I would have looked for the presence of blood, specifically looking for any red-brown stains on items that had not previously been screened with Blue Star from the crime scene team. I would have then done my screening test, presumptive tests to indicate the presence of blood. If they screen positive, they would move on to DNA analysis. If they screen negative, I would not take those samples on further.
Okay. Let's go back and let's talk first on when you received these items. If you had, did you write a report in regards to this case?
Yes, I did.
Do you have a copy of your report?
Yes, I do.
Will it help you to go through these items line by line to be able to testify in a more clear way for the jury about what you did?
Yes, it would.
The court's permission will ask that she uses a report to refresh her memory.
Any issue with that, Mr. Hofbaker?
No objection to that,
All right.
Judge.
Your Honor, may I open my binder?
You may go ahead and you may use your report.
So starting with the items that were delivered to you on or about May 7th of 2024, can you tell the jury what you had and what you looked at?
So the items received by the laboratory on May 7th were a pair of jeans and another item that contained 2 sweatshirts and a long sleeve t-shirts.
Did you know who these were, or they were these items belonging to a person by the name of Houston Danker?
That's what was indicated on the receipt form when I received the items for the jeans. It did not in the description indicate who the 3 sweatshirts belonged to, were the 2 sweatshirts and 1 long sleeve t-shirt.
When you say you do DNA analysis, what type of screening did you perform on these items that you've just talked about?
On these specific items, I was screening for the presence of blood.
And how do you do that?
So when I'm screening for the presence of blood, I first clean my bench area, individually lay out each item of evidence by itself. I examine that item, so I'm looking for the presence of any red-brown stains on the piece of clothing. I would then circle those areas, And then I would collect a subsample of that by dampening 2 sterile swabs and swabbing just a little area of the stain, set those aside, and those swabs would be what I would perform my screening test on. We perform 2 color change screening tests. So I would put the both clear liquids on one swab, one on the other, and then put hydrogen peroxide that pushes the reaction forward. If my screen tests are positive for the presence of blood, one of the samples should turn blue, the other should turn pink. In this case, on all those items, there were 9 stains on the jeans that did not screen positive for the presence of blood, so no DNA testing was attempted. And then on the other shirts, there was actually no stains noted when I examined them, so no screening tests were performed or DNA analysis.
Okay. As you perform your analysis on these items, do you at that time have a known DNA sample of Houston Danker?
I did perform testing on the known buccal sample of Houston Danker. That was received later, submitted to laboratory after I had already examined the items in my report.
Okay. So you at some point have these known DNA samples, but initially you're just detecting if you can find blood in these items that you've testified about, correct?
Yes, so his known was submitted at the end of May, where the other stuff was earlier in May.
Was there blue jeans that you tested that was, I believe, that's the item number 46?
Yes.
And you say blood screening was negative on that item?
Yes, in the 9 areas I tested.
Were there other items that you tested?
Specifically, not on item 46. Those were the only areas. Then I moved on to the next items, item 47.
Okay.
Item 47 contained 2 sweatshirts and a long sleeve t-shirt. I examined each of those items individually and detected no stains on any of those items. So that concluded my exam on item 47.
Okay. What other item did you test?
I tested item 52.
What was that?
That was a pair of black shoes.
Okay. Can you describe what those shoes were?
I would have to refer to my bench notes to describe them.
Okay. If I showed you what's been admitted as State Exhibit 30, Exhibit 300. Sorry. Do you recognize these as those items?
Your Honor, may I get gloves out of my pocket so I can handle the items?
You may.
Yes, I do recognize these items.
How do you recognize what's been admitted as State 300?
So specifically, these black pair of shoes, you can actually see the DCI case number and the item number and the date I examined these 2 shoes written in silver marker, Sharpie marker, on the outside just above the sole on each item of shoe, indicating that this is the actual pair of shoes I examined that is associated to item 52. In addition, I also collected swabs of the soles of these shoes, and you can see these swab boxes indicate the DCI case number, the item number, and a description of where I swabbed, and bearing my date and initials of examination.
Thank you. What were you looking for in what's been admitted as State 300?
I was looking for the presence of blood, so once again I was examining them to see if I could find any red-brown stains.
And what was the results of your examination?
Screening did not indicate the presence of blood on 4 areas of the right shoe, and screening did not indicate the presence of blood on 5 areas of the left shoe. Therefore, no further DNA testing was attempted. You will note on those shoes, you'll see circles with a negative/negative. Those are indicating the areas in which I did my presumptive screening tests on.
When you examine items at the lab, do you always find presence of DNA or presence of blood or presence of what you're looking for?
No, we do not.
Okay. Is it a misconception out there that you as scientists will always have to find that?
Yes, it is a misconception. We have as many cases that don't have a presence of a body fluid that do. We also have a good subset of cases where no DNA profiles are developed.
And what are some of the reasons why sometimes there's nothing that you find when you test these items?
There could be a lot of different reasons. So one, there could never have been any biological fluids or DNA left on the item. Obviously, wearing pieces of clothing, we'd expect some small amounts of DNA. It could have the biological fluid or DNA could be cleaned off or removed. DNA also cannot be seen by the naked eye, but it can be washed off. It can be degraded, such as leaving something in sunlight, different nature factors such as the dirt and different things you spray things with can degrade the DNA and make it in a form that it's such small, tiny pieces of DNA that we're not able to develop a DNA profile from it.
Okay. So in other words, things like blood can be cleaned by someone, correct?
Yes.
Passage of time in terms of if this shoe that you're collecting is 3 years down the road or 2 years down the road, that passage of time can degrade that sample of blood that would have been on that item, correct?
Yes. As a piece of shoe or an item of clothing ages out, if it's a small amount of DNA or it's cleaned up, it wouldn't be present there for us to detect with our testing.
Were there any other items that you tested?
Yes, item 53.
Can you tell us about that?
Item 53 was a white rug. Once again, I looked for the presence of any areas of possible blood. My screening test did not indicate the presence of blood on 13 different areas of that rug, so no DNA testing was attempted.
What about item 54?
Item 54 was a large piece of carpet. So specifically in item 54, I did not do any blood screening tests for this. It was indicated when it was submitted in my communication with the crime scene team that collected it, criminalist Janna Berry, that they had already applied a blood screening reagent at the scene when they collected these items called Blue Star Forensic. Because Blue Star Forensic uses the same portion of the blood as my other screening test, it was determined that I would not do any screening tests and I would just attempt to sample the areas where she saw the Blue Star reaction in that segment of carpet. So she helped me identify those areas and I took cuttings of 6 of those areas and attempted DNA on them.
And what were the results of your findings?
No DNA profile was developed from 5 of the areas on the carpet. One area did produce a few DNA factors, but those DNA factors were just too weak for any conclusive interpretation.
Okay. And from your understanding, this was they came from a house where a person by the name of Houston Danker was supposed to be living at, correct?
Yes.
Was it surprising? Is it surprising to you that even though this person lived here, you still were unable to find DNA factors or able to retrieve DNA factors from these tests?
No, it's not unexpected. Carpet is something that doesn't either holds a lot of DNA or very little, and typically people walk on it with shoes and not your bare feet, so the bottom soles of your shoes, unless you walked in a biological fluid, would not have very much DNA present. So it's not unexpected. In addition, all of our screening tests are only indications of blood, not human blood. So if those areas did screen positive with Janna's for blood, it could also be blood of another animal, where my DNA testing is specific for human DNA only.
Can you tell us about the other items that you tested?
Yes. The next item I examined was item 56. This was swabs from marker E and from marker B. Once again, my communication and the receipt form indicated these swabs were swabs of area that had blue star reaction positive. So therefore, I did no further blood screening, but I did attempt DNA on them, and no DNA profile was developed from those swabs.
And again, we're talking about these items that were retrieved by Janna Berry, who just testified before you, correct?
Yes.
Okay. What other item did you test?
I also tested a swab indicated as swabs of marker C. Once again, no DNA profile was developed from that swab.
What item did you test next?
I tested item 58, which was a pair of tan moccasins. No stains were noted in my examination, but they indicated that they possibly saw something on the right sole that I didn't see in my examination at the crime scene. So I went ahead and swabbed the right sole area of that right moccasin to attempt DNA testing on it in case the stained area just lightened in the transport. And once again, no DNA profile was developed.
What's the next item that you tested?
Item 59, which was a pair of brown boots.
What were the results of your test?
Once again, no stains were noted on the boots, but I did attempt to swab the soles of those boots and do DNA testing. And once again, no DNA profiles were developed from the swabs of the soles of those boots.
And again, these were boots that, as reported to you, belonged to either Houston Danker or found at his house, correct?
These boots were collected by the crime scene team. As for the ownership, I'm unaware.
Okay. What else did you test next?
That was the end of my examinations of items from the scene. I then examined the known buckle sample of Houston Danker. So because you previously heard that DNA, if we develop a profile, we can't tell whose DNA profile it is. So I developed that known DNA profile so that if I did have DNA profiles developed, I would have that for comparison's sake.
Okay. And so you developed a DNA profile of Houston Danker.
Yes.
But fair enough to say that the bulk of your work that you did was testing most of these items and receiving a negative answer in terms of a DNA profile in these items, correct?
Yes, I did not develop any interpretable DNA profiles from all the items I sampled for DNA.
Even though they seem to be items that humans interact with, someone could have interacted with in terms of wearing the shoes or using the carpet in that residence, correct?
Yes, but my sampling of the shoes were on the outside area, so typically you would leave your DNA on the inside or the tongue area, so all of my testing was not in those areas.
So you talked about testing the outside. If you tested the inside, would you expect to find the DNA of the wearer of the shoe?
Yes, I would expect to get some DNA factors when you're testing for wearer DNA on the inside of the shoe. Sometimes it's not a complete profile, but I would have expected to get at least more than I got on anything else I tested.
And did you get anything? Or?
Only one sample, and it only gave me 3 DNA peaks. So I would have expected to get at least a partial profile or mixture from the inside of wearer shoes.
Can you explain that more?
So we're going to go back to what was probably talked about yesterday. So bear in mind that some of this might be repeat. But so because we test 21 locations, I have, because you give half your DNA from mom and half your DNA from dad, you have no possibility of leaving 2 peaks at any one location. So the 1 2-week profile from the carpet stain, I saw 2 peaks over the 21 locations and 1 peak at a sexing locus or location. So in a wearer DNA, as you continually wear something, you can leave your DNA behind, but because it's skin cell DNA, it can be degraded or slough off. So that's why I said that I would at least expect to get a partial DNA profile consistent with a lot more factors than what I got from the one item, one cutting that I got a few DNA factors from. Sometimes because people share different items of clothing, you might get more than 2 peaks at locations, which would indicate a mixture of DNA.
I have no further questions. Thank you.
Mr. Hawbaker, any questions?
None, Your Honor. Thank you.
All right, thank you, ma'am. You may step down. Stay prepared to call its next witness.
The state calls Vic Murillo. The court gives me 1 minute to just check with him.
Yep. If anybody wants to stand up and stretch, go right ahead. All right, let's go ahead and have a seat. Yep. Good morning, sir. Can I have you come on up here to my far left, if you would? And you can go ahead and have a seat when you get there. Okay, go ahead and have a seat. So that microphone's on. You can adjust it however you'd like. I'm going to go ahead and swear you in, so please raise your right hand. Sir, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you'll be giving will be the truth?
I do.
All right, and sir, for the record, can you please provide us with your first name and your last name and spell them for us?
Yes. First name is Victor, Victor. Last name is Murillo. Last name is Murillo.
All right, thank you, sir. Mr. Codiago, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Judge. Good morning, Mr. Murillo.
Good morning.
Can you tell this jury what you do for a living?
Well, I'm currently employed as a criminalist part-time with the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigations State Crime Laboratory in Ankeny, Iowa.
Okay. And how long have you been employed in this position?
I began my employment in July of 1982. I spent 41 and a half years as a full-time employee of the crime laboratory. I actually retired at the end of 2023 and then was hired back. So I'm back working as a part-time employee, helping with some backlog, with some training, some other things. And I've been doing that for the last year or so.
As in the course of your duties with the crime lab, have you been in various positions, and what position were you last in, or are you in now?
Yeah, so in 1982, I started as a laboratory aide or laboratory assistant, where I helped with several different sections of the lab, working mostly in photography. In 1985, I became a criminalist. I began working arson, explosive cases, gunshot residue cases, trace evidence cases. In 1989, I became full-time in the firearms section, so began working with firearm-related evidence at that time, and have been doing that ever since.
Okay. What's your education background?
So I have an Associate of Arts degree in criminalistics from the Des Moines Area Community College in Ankeny. I took several classes that were kind of related to the different sections of the lab that I currently work in. So I had a firearm class, I had a fingerprint class, a drug class, so several different classes that were kind of related to what I do today. I also have a bachelor's degree from Drake University out of Des Moines. That degree program was kind of a general science program, so a lot of the criminalists are science majors, so either chemistry or biology or physics. So mine is kind of a combination, so I took all of those types of classes. So education-wise, formally, that was the extent of my background. Once you become employed in the laboratory, you're going to be assigned to a certain section of the lab, and then there's additional training that you will have to go through.
As a firearms and tool mark expert, have you testified as an expert in this in court in various cases in the state of Iowa?
Yes, I have.
Okay. Can you briefly tell the jury the science of firearms and tool mark that you do?
I'm sorry, the type?
Can you tell the jury briefly the science of firearms and how firearms work?
Yeah, so again, currently I'm assigned to the firearm and tool mark section of our laboratory, so most of what we are going to look at are going to be guns or firearms. We're going to test fire a lot of those guns, do some type of examination on them, and then we also look at a number of fired components, so a lot of fired bullets, fired cartridge cases, trying to match them to one another or match them eventually to a firearm.
So fair enough to say, in the course of your career, you've fired or testified a lot of firearms.
Yes, so kind of depends on the day-to-day operation for me, and some days I will look at a dozen firearms in one day. Other cases I might look at one gun in a week, depending on the case. So if there's a lot of other evidence that needs to be compared to that one firearm, it may take a full week to look at all of those other components before I eventually get to that gun. So over the years, yes, I've looked at thousands of firearms since 1982.
Okay, so I see that you're wearing what appears to be Apple headphones. Is
Yes.
that for because you need that to help for your hearing?
Yes, I do have a hearing impairment, and but these do help with my hearing, so I'm actually using them as a hearing aid. So
Okay.
I'm not listening to anything else. I don't have my phone with me, so I'm only listening to what's going on in the courtroom today.
Okay. I just wanted to clear that up with the jury in case someone's wondering why you have some headphones on.
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to direct your attention to this particular case that we are here in this courtroom for. Were you at some point in charge of reviewing certain firearms or multiple firearms to test whether they were firearms consistent with a cartridge that had been found at the residence where Mr. Cooper had been shot?
Yes, I was the first one to get involved with the firearms evidence in this particular incident, so I looked at several items back in 2021.
Okay. And before we go into that, can you just, for the sake of the jurors who are not very familiar with firearms, can you just walk them through how a firearm works, the various components of a firearm, and the terminologies like bullets, cartridges that they've had? Just explain to them what those would be.
Yeah, so it's a little hard to explain a firearm because there are a lot of different types of firearms that out there. There are the old style revolvers where you have a cylinder that is filled with a number of different cartridges. Every time we pull the trigger, the gun fires, a wheel turns so that one of the chambers is in line with the barrel. Bullet goes down the barrel towards the target that we're aiming at. We release the trigger, pull it again, cylinder rotates, another cartridge, live round is lined up with the barrel, fires, bullet goes down the barrel, and we can continue to do that until we fire all, usually like 5 or 6 of those cartridges in that cylinder. There are also semi-automatic pistols and rifles where we're going to have a magazine that is going to hold several cartridges at a time. Could be anywhere from 6 to 7 cartridges or live rounds of ammunition to 30 or more cartridges that are held in that magazine. That magazine is usually inserted into the bottom of the gun, whether it's a handgun or a rifle. And then there is a bolt or a slide that's going to be reciprocated. It moves back and forth on top of the firearm to cycle the ammunition from the magazine into the chamber. When it's fired, it pulls the fired cartridge case out of the chamber and ejects it, so it's left somewhere close to that weapon when it's discharged, but the bullet still goes down the barrel towards the target that we're aiming at. So every time we pull the trigger, the gun fires. There's nothing mechanical that happens other than that slide or that bolt moving back and forth. It chambers the round for us, and it extracts and ejects the fired cartridge case for us. So all we have to do is pull the trigger, and it fires. We release the trigger, pull the trigger again, and it will fire again until we've used up all of the ammunition in that magazine. So the ammunition is the live cartridges that we're talking about that go into that magazine or go into that cylinder. Ammunition is basically what we call a cartridge or a live round. So that cartridge is made up of 4 components. One is the cartridge case. A cartridge case is kind of like a cup, coffee cup if you will, that holds all of the other components. At the bottom of that coffee cup or that cartridge case is a primer. It's a small pressure-sensitive explosive material that's imparted into the base of that cartridge case. So when we pull the trigger, the hammer goes forward or the firing pin goes forward, and it's going to strike that primer on the base of that cartridge case and cause a spark on the inside of that cartridge case. Inside of that cartridge case is going to be powder, smokeless powder. When that spark goes off from the primer, it's going to ignite the powder. That powder is going to burn, create a lot of pressure, and that's going to push the bullet, which is on the top of that cartridge, down the barrel and towards the target that we're aiming at. So that cartridge is made up of 4 components. The cartridge case, the primer at the bottom, the powder on the inside, and the bullet or the projectile that's on the front or the forward end of that cartridge. When we fire the gun, the bullet is going to go down the barrel towards the target. the cartridge case is either going to be left inside of the gun and has to be manually removed, as in the revolver that we talked about, or it's going to be physically extracted and ejected by the gun, and it's going to be left somewhere close to that weapon when it's discharged. So those are the things that we're normally looking for at a crime scene. Is going to be the fired bullets, the fired cartridge cases that are going to be somewhere close or in the firearm, and then if they're outside of the gun, so we have fired bullets at a crime scene, fired cartridge cases at a crime scene, we can possibly match them to one another to try and determine whether they all came from the same gun or not, or we can possibly try to match them to one specific firearm. Were they fired by this particular gun? So that's my job, is to look at those fired components, look at the firearms, try to determine sometimes whether those bullets and those cartridge cases came from that specific firearm.
Let's unpack a little bit of that. You've talked about cartridge casings. Is that what sometimes people call casings, just or shell casings?
Yeah, it's known by a number of different nomenclatures, a little different for everybody. So yeah, it could be a casing. Sometimes we call it a cartridge case. I refer to it as a cartridge case.
Okay. But if there's a reference to a casing, it's pretty much synonymous to a cartridge case.
Yes, I would know what they were talking about. Yes, same thing.
And to be clear, that's what ejects in some firearms. When you fire, the bullet goes and the casings ejects from the gun.
Correct.
Okay. When the casing ejects from the gun, does it sometimes behave in an unpredictable manner in terms of where it will land or how it will travel?
Yeah, that cartridge case, when it ejects, is going to eject from that firearm differently for every firearm. Every gun ejects it in a different direction, a different distance. It kind of depends on the firearm. It depends on the ammunition. How powerful is that ammunition? It depends on how the gun is held, what position or what direction that gun is held as to where that cartridge case will end up as well. So there are a number of variables that are taken into consideration. If we find a cartridge case at a scene, we can kind of be general in getting an idea of where that cartridge case came from, where was the gun, but in some cases we may not be able to be very specific.
So in other words, yeah, if the flooring, the nature of the flooring, the way it bounces once it ejects out can affect where it lands and eventually ends up.
Yeah, again, that's another whole set of variables. Once it hits the floor, it is cylindrical in shape, so it will roll on a smooth floor. It will bounce. It will hit a wall, furniture, so it may not end up in the same position where it eventually fell after it was fired. It may get kicked out on a street. They get run over and get moved by vehicles and people walking. So, yeah, they could be in a different position once we're doing our investigation from where they originally fell at the time of the shooting.
When you, and I don't know if you talked about a caliber, what do we mean when we hear the term caliber weapon or something to that extent?
Yeah, so the caliber or the cartridge name refers to the ammunition that's being used. In this particular case today, we're going to talk about 22 caliber ammunition. So 22 caliber ammunition, same thing that we talked about before. It has a cartridge case. It has a priming material that's around the rim at the bottom of the cartridge case instead of being in the middle, but it still has powder, still has a bullet. So we still have a bullet that's being fired. We have a cartridge case sometimes that's going to be ejected, so nothing different. The 22 cartridge case, or the 22 cartridges, the live ammunition, is probably the smallest cartridge that we usually deal with at the laboratory, but it's also sometimes the most popular. It used to be the most popular cartridge that we would see in shooting cases.
And tell us more about that.
The 22 ammunition?
Yeah.
So yeah, again, you know, back in the day, a long time ago when I started doing this type of casework, I saw a lot of revolvers. We didn't see a lot of semi-automatic pistols. So a lot of revolvers and a lot of 22 caliber cartridges. .22 ammunition is probably the most popular type of ammunition that's out there. You can find it almost everywhere. So as long as you have a .22 caliber cartridge and the gun is designed for .22 caliber ammunition, that cartridge should fit in that gun. So it doesn't make any difference who made it, who the manufacturer is. As long as the cartridge name and the designation for that firearm is the same, then they should be compatible with one another.
Okay. Can you tell the jury how toolmark comparison works?
I'm sorry, how?
Can you tell the jury how toolmark comparison works, how you compare firearms and what cartridge was used?
Sorry, I still didn't hear part of that.
Can you tell the jury what you do in terms of comparing a firearm and whether this particular cartridge was used in that firearm?
In a specific firearm?
Yes.
Okay. So when I look at the evidence in the case, I may look at a firearm, and so the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take a lot of information off of that gun, make, model, serial number. I'm going to check the safeties on the gun, make sure that everything is working correctly, and eventually that gun is going to be test-fired. We're going to produce test-fired bullets, test-fired cartridge cases from that firearm. Those are going to be my knowns. I know they came from that specific firearm because I just test-fired it. So those test-fired bullets, test-fired cartridge cases are my knowns that will eventually be used to compare to the unknowns. As I go through all of the unknowns, the bullets and cartridge cases from the scene, again, I'm taking a lot of notes, a lot of information is taken from each of them. Cartridge case, I'm going to look at it. I know that it's .22 caliber from the shape and the size. We can measure it. We look at the head stamp information so we know who manufactured that particular cartridge. I can look at the bullet, look at the diameter of the bullet, and the diameter should be roughly 0.22 of an inch wide, so I know it's consistent with a .22 caliber bullet coming from a .22 caliber cartridge case or cartridge. I then begin looking at some of the information that's put on those items by the firearm. On the cartridge case, I'm looking at the firing pin impression. It could be a number of different shapes. It could be round or square or rectangular in shape. So I'll make a note of that as well. And then when I look at the bullet, not only do I look at the caliber and the diameter, but I'm going to weigh it, and I'm going to look at all of the rifling information that's present on that fired bullet. That bullet is going to go down the barrel of a firearm. The inside of the barrel is going to have spiral grooves that are on the inside of that barrel. As the bullet travels down the barrel, the outside of the bullet is going to come in contact with the rifling on the inside of the barrel. It's going to cause that bullet to spin with the rifling as it moves down the barrel. The inside of the barrel of the gun may have 6 grooves in it. It may have 5. It may have 22. The numbers are all different. It may spin the bullet clockwise. It may spin it counterclockwise. So you may have a right twist or it may have a left twist to it. So I can look at the firearm. I can count the number of lands and grooves in the barrel, look at the width of the rifling dimensions that are in that barrel, and then I'll also look at the bullet. Does it have the same number of land and groove impressions on it as what I'm seeing on the barrel? So if I have a bullet that is 6 right, 6 land and groove impressions with a right hand twist, and I have a barrel that has 5 lands and grooves with a left hand twist, then I know that that bullet could not have come from that particular firearm, because the class rifling characteristics are totally different. So that's my job initially when I'm looking at those items, to look at the cartridge case, firing pin information, breech face information, look at the bullet, take as much information off of that bullet as I can, the caliber, what the bullet is made of, whether it's lead or copper plated or brass plated, the rifling information that's present on it. I can count the number, I look at the direction, I can measure the dimensions of that rifling information. From all of that information, I can put it into a computer database and get an idea of the types of firearms, the makes and models of guns that could have fired that particular bullet. And that may be good investigative information that will usually show up in my report.
So in,
Mr. Kodiak, I was going to actually stop you. I think now's a good time to take our mid-morning break. So we've been going a little over an hour and a half. So, ladies and gentlemen, we'll take approximately a 15-minute break at this point. And again, I would remind you of the admonition that I've given you previously.